Okay, let's see. Okay, which way is the best way
That
to? Okay,
that
English.
looks perfect. Yeah, we already have people joining, so amazing.
Oh, very
Yeah.
nice.
Well, I'll introduce myself to everyone who doesn't know me. I'm Ashley Cipoletti. I'm the owner and founder of Co-Regulated Canines and a certified professional dog trainer. And then Kelly, I'll let you formally introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Kelly McCullough. I'm an LCSW, a licensed child and adolescent therapist. I also work with adults and I specialize in anxiety. So Ashley and I had this brilliant, well, Ashley had the brilliant idea for our live, and I was so excited to hop on because I definitely also have personal experience with how having a doggo with behavioral issues, as much as we love them dearly, can definitely exacerbate our own anxiety and mental health. So happy to be here and hopefully share some support if others are going through something similar.
Yeah, thank you. I know. I feel like you have a really unique perspective on everything, so I'm so excited to have you. So yeah, let's just kind of dive right in. So obviously today's topic is going to be dog behavior problems and owner anxiety. And we're going to kind of go over some support and strategies of why it matters. And I work with a lot of, I would say, complicated dogs with complicated behaviors, and I know it causes a lot of anxiety in their owners. And sometimes owners might have anxiety, maybe struggles on their own, and this exacerbates it. And other times it can really almost cause it, right? Because you're like, I'm scared my dog's gonna bite someone or something like that. So the first question I have for you that I know a lot of my clients ask as well is how can I stay calm when my dog's behavior triggers my anxiety? So in the moment when you're feeling really like that heightened stress and you're like, what can I do? It's really hard to think because that kind of shuts down. So what are your, yeah, thoughts or strategies on that?
I think the very first step that I encourage people to work on is trying to identify that anxiety early on. So often we don't recognize that we're feeling anxious until we're at an already really elevated, heightened state. But the truth is, like, if we rate our anxiety 1 to 100, 100 being max, 1 being super chill, like how we're feeling, right now, we don't go from 1 to 100 in a millisecond. There's all these gradations along the way. We have a much easier time managing our anxiety if we try to catch it earlier. So instead of waiting until, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm about to have a panic attack, trying to pick up on those really subtle signs like, oh, my palms are feeling a tiny bit clammy, or I feel like I'm having a little bit of a harder time thinking straight. Trying to pick up on those lower level cues earlier on so that you can intervene sooner. And then I would, if it's pet anxiety specifically, really recommend doing, and I'm curious, Ashley, maybe you practice this with your owners already, just some like basic relaxation. So, like deep breathing, you can do that anywhere. And it really is, I know everyone talks about deep breathing. It gets talked about a lot because let's be honest, it really works. They actually train Navy pilots to do paced breathing when they're in pilot jets in military times. If it's effective enough as a military tactic, it's effective enough for me. So
Yeah.
deep or some progressive muscle relaxation where you're tensing and relaxing your muscles. And I wonder, depending on the situation with the dog, you might reach a point where the most effective thing actually is to separate. If you're able to put the dog in a safe place, maybe that's the backyard or the crate, maybe they're fine just in the living room. Go to the bathroom if the dog is safe to be left alone. Put cold water on the back of your neck, cold water on your face. That the physical sensation of cold water on our bodies really cools us down when we're anxious. Our body overheats, gets really warm. We can counteract that by just physiologically changing our body temperature. Cooling our body down can help our anxiety get a bit more in control. So first identify it early on, try some deep breathing. There's a lot of great apps for that, or you can just count 4 4 4 4. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, and repeat. Progressive muscle relaxation, and then separate if it's safe to do so. Put some cold water on your face while you make a game plan.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I feel like I have a couple like personal experiences from those too. And every single time I'm working with a dog that has aggression, I have to take those deep breaths because if I feel my heart rate elevate, those early signs, I'm like, this is not going to help the situation. And dogs like can smell your stress. They can smell cortisol. So I'm like, I don't really want to add that. And then obviously if you're going to like be sweating more and you're tensing up because of the stress or anxiety, I might feel even as a trainer like I'm still nervous working with dogs that could potentially be dangerous. So I've found the deep breaths when I'm not sure, or if I'm working with a shelter dog and I have no idea their history, I'm going to take those deep breaths, and it drastically helps. I feel like it really helps diffuse the situation for both the human and the dog. It's not going to necessarily be the fix for it, but it helps a lot. So I do that. And I notice it with my clients too. I'll be like, I'll notice them tense up. I'm like, okay, just take an audible deep breath. And it really helps their dogs. And then the separation is huge too. If you're, even if it's like puppies and they're driving you crazy, like, and you feel your nervous system get activated, or you're just feeling like you're gonna scream or whatever, it's like, notice those earlier signs, take a breath, take some separation, give your dog like a food stuffed Kong or a long lasting chew or something while you separate, so you're both working on, it's almost like coping skills for both of you, is so crucial. And the cold really helps too. I remember when I was going through my own, like, my own struggles with kind of chronic anxiety, and the cold showers, even just cold in the moment, helped a lot. So I love that you mentioned all those pieces.
I would love to ask you, Ashley, then to follow. What's your experience with owner anxiety causing pet anxiety? And I heard you say like they can smell fear. And when, yeah, I have a 100-pound German Shepherd, he's a rescue. He's 8. We love him dearly. When we first got him 7 years ago, he had a lot of issues. And our dog trainers back then told us, oh my gosh, if you're anxious, your dog can sense it, which only made me feel so much more anxious.
Exactly.
Your take on that, or yeah, what you have to add on that?
Yes. So I kind of take it with a grain of salt. So I find that anxiety doesn't, or our anxiety doesn't cause a dog's reaction necessarily. I think it can be fuel to a reaction. So if they are already prone to having a over the top reaction, or having an aggressive, I don't know, reaction to something, I don't think us being anxious causes it. It's just like contributing. Because if they're on the fence and they're like, and in German Shepherds especially, we're kind of bred to be working with people. They're very like emotionally, I would say, aware of kind of how people are feeling, that I think they're more sensitive than maybe some other breeds that weren't bred to kind of work alongside people as much. But I think, yeah, it's tough to say. Again, I don't think it causes it, but it contributes to it. And I also feel like knowing that is going to make you feel more anxious. So I try to be cautious saying that to pet parents, because I know that immediately they're gonna be like, oh crap, now I'm anxious about being anxious. So I instead want to maybe help them feel more safe, and get the end result that I'm looking for, is how can I actually help them calm them down. And sometimes I just maybe leave that out. And I'll say, okay, if you get nervous, your ability to problem solve is going to go down. So then your ability to step in the moment is going to be clouded, where if they're feeling calm and relaxed, I think they'd have better outcomes navigating a sticky situation, if that makes sense.
So interesting, the parallels between managing your pet's anxiety and managing your child's anxiety, which
I
is
know.
really, and one feedback I give parents frequently is, um, and I wonder if it's just kind of subtle semantics, nuance of how you phrase things different. Instead of they're going to get anxious if you feel anxious, might be pointing out, I love how you're doing such a great job staying calm in this moment. Your kiddo or your dog is going to pick up on how calm you're feeling, and that's really going to give them the confidence that they need to go forward and do things on their own.
Totally. No, and it's part of why I really like doing, I do like pattern games with dogs and owners, because they get a lot of reps in, and it's basically creating predictability in an otherwise unpredictable world. I know we do this, we've chatted about this, doing it with kiddos too. And it's so helpful, because not only is the owner practicing the same skill over and over and over again, and gradually expanding their bandwidth, or like if they're going into something that's a little bit more nerve wracking, their dog's also practicing. So if they're used to, oh, I go out the front door and it's chaos, now it's okay, we go out the front door, we come right back. We go out the front door, we come right back. And it, like, that decreases both anxiety. And I'm really trying to be attuned to, like, what's the body language of the human I'm working with and the body language of the dog. And I check in with the human, or if I notice they're not breathing or not talking a lot, or they're tensing, we can stop, and we can always create space, or I can take over, or whatever we need to do. But ideally, if I'm doing my job right, we're not going to feel anxious about it in a session together.
Your parallel process, you're providing that predictability and structure for the owner so the owner can then provide it for the dog.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too of checking in, and even just admitting, like, if you're feeling anxious yourself, I'm like, okay, how are we feeling? I'm feeling like this is a little tense. Maybe let's go, back inside or something like that. But
Yeah.
okay, so I'll move on to my next question I have for you. And this is a good one. And if you need water, yeah, you're good.
My throat, you swallow the wrong way and it's like,
I know,
ah.
and then you're like, I'm just gonna be like choking on alive. It's fine. No, but I'm glad you're good and we're not choking. So what are some emotional regulation techniques that owners can try? I guess we actually talked about this the next time they're feeling anxious, but I think there's a couple other little pieces maybe. So I know you talked about like the deep breathing, but you didn't mention necessarily the self-talk piece that I would love to hear more about.
So definitely just to review that, the physical relaxation. So the paced breathing or the progressive muscle relaxation, the cold water on your face. And then the piece I didn't touch on yet, I know for me, when I was going through those issues with my dog, I felt so isolated. And I would walk down the street with my dog, see all the dogs running around at the dog park. Everyone looks so carefree. And I'm like, I could never do that with my dog, at least not back then. And it was so easy to fall into this trap of I'm the only one that's struggling like this. I think just the fact that we have this live, just the fact that people are here viewing, just the fact that Ashley, you're providing the valuable service that you are, all of that is evidence that a lot of people struggle with their dogs in one way or another. Maybe it's not aggression, but maybe it's potty training. Maybe it's not friendliness with strangers. Maybe it's friendliness with other dogs. Like whatever the issue might be, remind yourself that you're really not alone. It's easy to feel isolated when you're maybe stuck at home with your dog because your dog isn't friendly with other dogs, or your dog isn't friendly with strangers, so you can't bring them out to the restaurant. I'd always be so jealous. You go to the brewery, especially in San Diego, everyone's there with their dogs, just like so sweet, curled up at their feet. My dog would be a disaster. It'd be like the police would get called if I were to try to bring my dog in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always tell people too, I'm like, you're seeing only the dogs that are really good at going out. And sometimes you see the ones that shouldn't be out and you're like, and I'm like, all the dogs that are struggling, you're not seeing out. So it almost changes your bias or changes your perspective because the dogs you see are the dogs that are like happy go lucky. You can take me everywhere. And I know because I've worked with these dogs, I'm like, there's like hundreds and thousands of these dogs that are really struggling and cannot go to the dog park, cannot go to the coffee shop, hardly can even walk, doing a neighborhood walk. And there are tons of dogs in shelter environments that are fantastic, and also a lot that are struggling with the transition because some have been shipped from like Cambodia. They're thrown into San Diego, and you're like, okay, now you have to adapt to this totally different environment after a lot of trauma. So I try and remind people that, there's just different perspectives on it and everyone's on their own path with it, and many of those people with those dogs at the coffee shop have other things they're struggling with, like you mentioned, like maybe their dog's chewing up everything in their house or something like that. So it's a good point. And I always like journaling exercises too. Sometimes if people are into it, I'm like, I won't force it on them, but if they like journaling, I find it can be helpful to kind of uncover the self-talk and then get them kind of out of the everything's terrible mindset and shift them into, let's look at some good. What do we like about our dog? What are our expectations, or at least just venting out, all the things that we're struggling with.
Yes. There's always something, and again, another parallel working with parents and kids, always something your child is doing right, always something your dog is doing right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's like the whole foundation of the way I train with positive reinforcement is mostly through something called shaping. And so I'll tell people, I'm like, if you notice your dog doing anything good, and good can look like neutral, like it can be boring. It can look like a dog doing nothing. I'm like, let's reward that. And of course, there are tons of times, like no living being is aggressive 24/7 or reacting or scared 24/7. So those moments you can notice it and reinforce it, and then it switches your mind. Instead of the more like corrective training methods people are used to, that's focusing on setting them up to fail so you can correct them when they're wrong. But if you look at all the times they were right, then you can reinforce that and get it more and more and be more, I think, empathetic and understanding versus why aren't you getting it right? And you're constantly having to correct them, which feels, I think, just damaging to your relationship a bit.
Yeah. I love that. And that really sets up a relationship of trust between owner and dog, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
dog is getting that positive feedback over and over again. And then the owner is also recognizing the strengths that their dog has.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know if did you want to touch or like yeah, just touch upon your own experience with your dog if you feel comfortable. I feel like that could just be helpful to kind of walk through what that experience was like. Yeah, when you were kind of in the
Yeah,
weeds.
of course. So it was, yeah, we got his name is Max. We got him from Coastal German Shepherd Rescue. I don't know if you're familiar with that
No,
organization.
I'm not.
So they specialize in German Shepherds, which unfortunately, because they're a big breed, they're so cute when they're small puppies, but they require a lot of energy and effort, and they're big and they're what do you call it, working dogs, right? So they
Mhm.
need a lot of stimulation. For all of these reasons, they're often abandoned. Owners get them cute and small and fluffy, and look at how adorable it is, but they don't anticipate or they might not be capable of taking on the amount of work that they require when they get bigger. And then because they are big and strong, they can be a dangerous breed if their behaviors aren't managed appropriately. Any dog can be a dangerous dog,
Mhm.
right? Um, German Shepherds especially. So we took him in. He was maybe 11 months when we first got him, and he's such, oh my gosh, I wish you were in my office with me right now. Normally he is curled up at my feet. He's
Oh.
otherwise I'd show you guys. Um, but he had a lot of it. What do you call it? Fear aggression, right? Reactivity. He was homeless before we got him. Homeless. We don't know for how long, but he had mange that was so bad. Even still, 7 years later, he's missing some fur that just will never grow back. So he wasn't so people in that. I think that like 0 to 6 month age. This would be a question for you, Ashley. That's kind of crucial for that ability to trust other humans in a dog's life. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. They kind of, there's like critical socialization periods they'll talk about in the dog trainer world that are between that in that time space.
So
Yeah.
he missed out, I'm assuming, on most or all of that, and who knows what kind of maltreatment that he received. But luckily, we got connected. We were just very overwhelmed. There's some like, not like biting, but snapping,
Mhm.
around food. And even if we were all the way across the room, if we would turn towards him and like maybe I'd be bending over to pick something off the floor and I'm like 20 feet away from him, but he perceives it like me bending towards him
Yeah.
and out and just like get very afraid. So I would have to assume there was some trauma or abuse that happened. He would perceive that like an attack.
Hmm.
So, oh my goodness, we were so overwhelmed. Me and my husband did, you know, love dogs, but don't know the first thing what to do. When you get a dog, you don't expect to get a
Yeah.
dog with kinds of problems. And we certainly weren't expecting to have a dog with these kinds of problems. We thought like, oh, it's going to be like our happy family is growing and like we're going to go to the brewery and do all the things we see other dog owners do.
Hmm.
Fast forward, luckily we got involved with the trainer. I wish I had known you back then. I would have loved to work with you, but we had someone else that specialized in German Shepherds, gave us a lot of support, very direct, like do this, don't do that. And also was really helpful for us is helping us accept his limitations. Like this is a dog that probably you're never going to be able to have run around at OB Dog Beach. And that's okay because the risk of him acting out in a way that could be hurtful to another dog that could put that could put Max's life at risk, and it's just not, for us it wasn't worth it to take that risk. So modifying our expectations, maybe that was almost the most powerful thing. Accepting like our dog does great in our home. Now we have a 2-year old. He is an absolute angel with our 2-year old toddler, like you wouldn't believe it. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get emotional.
Oh.
um and then we even had him on medication for a while. We had him on Prozac for a while. So just setting him up, like recognizing what environment he thrives in.
Mhm.
Walks, he's great. Our house with our family, he's great. And just working within that construct. And he's had, I feel like, a great life. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I feel like that I love that you mentioned shifting your expectations. I think that's the biggest thing that I I've seen, yeah, I don't know, or just work with people on because it's like I have this idea of the dog I want, or I see it a lot in if they had an awesome dog, and then that dog passed and they bring another dog in. Sometimes it's the same breed, maybe even the same color, and then it's just a totally different dog. And it's I feel like a number one cause of people suffering is the like expectations of their dog to be someone that they're not. And I think unpacking that and also taking away the guilt of like, you didn't cause this. And I think there's some misinformation in the dog training space of, even if you get them as a puppy, or they're a clean slate, or it's all training, like you can just love and train a dog to be perfect. And it's just not true. It's like, just like with people, we all have different things, even that we're born with, that's different with our genetics. And even if our like birth was stressful, or if the mom was stressed during pregnancy. And with dogs, they're just a really unique species where there's like more, I feel like, variance and breed type and behaviors than any other species, that messes with their genetics a bit and then can cause funky behaviors in these environments that they live in. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of on a little tangent, but it's just really, it's huge to consider with expectations, is who's the dog that you actually share your life with, and embracing their individuality the most that you can, and look for different ways that you can share joy with them. And I have my own dog that I don't bring with me everywhere because I'm like, she's old. I'll be like, I feel like sometimes I'm gonna be like forcing walking her around when she's just like tired. I'm like, I don't want to force her to. And if a young dog runs up to her face, like, she's not gonna like that. And San Diego, you can't really control what a lot of other people do, and there's a lot of illegal off-leash dogs everywhere. So we just kind of avoid situations that would set her up to fail.
They have different personalities, and that's a great point you make. Even the same breed, same color, I could see it being really easy for an owner to project, well, my last, what's it like, what's the one that's
Oh,
doodle what?
like a golden
Yeah,
doodle or a labradoodle?
yeah, golden doodles that are very popular. I mean, they're great dogs. Oh my gosh, really, like, typically like friendly, outgoing, social. But I could see it being really easy for an owner to project, oh well, our last dark brown golden doodle was this way, so now we're gonna get another one, and kind of like trying to put them in that same mold. But they have different personalities, different temperaments.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of their behaviors too just like happen for things like totally out of your control. So it's like, okay, just be, yeah, being, I think, mindful and giving them space to be their unique selves, just like we're all different, and we're different even from our siblings from the same parents. And I think we even think, oh, this every dog from the same litter is going to be the same, and it doesn't work like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, okay. Well, let me move on to my next question here. Oh, this is a good one. So I hear this all the time, that I feel like people get really embarrassed about their dog's behavior. So they're like, I just got this dog, I'm walking him, and he's like barking and lunging and screaming at other dogs on leash. That's usually the number one thing I see for the public embarrassment, or maybe the dog's jumping or not recalling off leash. So what tips would you have for owners to kind of manage the frustration or anxiety they feel about public embarrassment about their dog?
I'm shaking my head because this was so me. When we first got Max, we were that, oh my gosh. I mean, you guys have all seen this. I'm like, you can't see me, but I'm kind of a petite individual. I'm like 5'3". And then I have this like 100-pound German Shepherd on a leash for walking. And before, now he's great on leash, but before, get an eyesight of another dog, he just go crazy. He's like pulling, barking, and they're loud dogs. I mean, dogs can be loud. German Shepherds are crazy loud. And I would just see everyone like way down the street just turn around and walk the other direction. They're like, we don't want
Oh.
to pass with this like crazy lady and her crazy dog.
Oh.
It's a real factor. And the biggest, I think, I'll just circle back to what I shared earlier. Remind yourself again that you're not the only one that's struggling with your dog. And even though it may feel like you are, it may look like you are, there's a bit of a self-selection bias. The people that typically are out with their dogs at the brewery or the dog beach or whatever, they're the people that have dogs that are doing well enough, are capable, have strengths to succeed in that environment. Typically, the people that are struggling with their dogs aren't as likely to be out. And the best thing you can do for your dog, and I'm curious, maybe this is hopefully in line with your training philosophy, but the best thing that you can do is practice. Follow your trainer's guidelines and practice within kind of whatever kind of environmental controls you have, whether it's a certain type of leash or with the treats or whatever the trainer's recommending. The best thing that you can do is give that exposure in a safe way, following your trainer's recommendations, and practice. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all you can do. You will see when you're out enough. Like now, my dog is an angel on leash. Knock on wood. Oh my gosh, he's old though, so he's approaching his geriatric phase of. But now, if you're out enough with your dog, you will see other dogs that struggle, and that can be just reassurance that everyone's on their own path with their dog. You're not the only one that's gone through something, and the best you can do is just try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you actually mentioned this in the webinar I went that we worked on together. Like I feel like it was last year maybe, but we were talking about how sometimes anxiety can get worse when you just always avoid the thing. And so, in this context, I want to kind of have everyone take this with a grain of salt. There's some power to avoiding setting your dog up to fail and avoiding, like, you know, don't walk your dog during these like peak hours, or some people just take out the walks entirely temporarily to really help dogs' nervous systems like reset and just calm them down. But also, if you always avoid it, the issue's never going to get better. And if that's how you decide to live your life, that's great. But if you want to work on that skill and be able to do that, then practicing, like you said, it's like, okay, it takes some reps and it also takes some breaks, and just
Yes.
committing to trying, I think, is big, and committing to what you can do about it. And I think it's a little harder in cities like San Diego, where the second some people walk out their door, it's like dog, 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 person, 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 or I have to go in an elevator and it's like the Tower of Terror of like just bing, there's a dog. Like if you have a reactive dog, it's the worst. But and I think a lot of people are just like, I want to avoid this forever. But it's finding that middle ground of like avoid it when you both need to just reset and calm yourselves, and then trying it out to set yourself up for success with the help of a trainer if we're talking about more like moderate to severe, I think, issues. But love that. Love that you mentioned that. I just wanted to add that because remember you said that in that other webinar. I was like, I loved that you said that.
And now you're giving me perspective. Thank goodness we never had to manage an elevator situation.
Yeah.
That was my worst nightmare, and certainly my dog's worst nightmare. But I can't. Oh,
It's
that,
my worst nightmare, and I am a trainer, and when I see that, oh my gosh, I'm working with a reactive dog, we have to go through these elevators and hallways and like a condo downtown, and everyone's like, it's dog friendly, and you don't know, or maybe you adopt a dog, and then a couple months in, the dog's behaviors develop into reactivity. It's really tough. Yeah.
if you are going to try to practice that exposure piece of taking your dog out under the guidance of your trainer, of course, what helped me is with the public embarrassment piece. Start in a safer environment. So don't go to like Mission Bay at 5 p.m. on a Friday night when it's going to be packed, right? Dogs everywhere, people everywhere, a lot of opportunities to manage really tough behavior from your dog. Start maybe like I would start, there's like a trail by my house that was really big, really wide, and normally really empty. So maybe I would pass one, two people, maybe three, and start to gain some confidence in that easier setting. And then you can work your way up slowly to areas that are going to have more possibilities for tough behaviors from your dog to manage, and also more opportunities for success as you gain confidence and as your dog gains confidence.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think too, this is a popular saying in the training world is like your dog's not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And so I think if we try to remember that and we're like, their behavior is not a reflection of you. They're not doing it to out of spite to get you. They're just doing it for all these other reasons we can guess, but we can't read their minds. We can't read anyone's minds, even when we speak the same language. So if we just kind of shift out of that and then remember that and advocate for your dog instead of letting people like peer pressure you into doing things you know aren't going to work out well for your dog, whether that's letting someone get too close or sneak a pet or interact with their dog and you're like, I don't know, and you just let someone. Those moments where you're like, I probably shouldn't, are the moments you should advocate for your dog, step away, and then you could honestly avoid some of public embarrassment. And I think the rest is if your dog's having that reaction, like remembering they're having a hard time, I'm going to move away, I'm doing the best that I can. And if people have things to say about it, they're not doing what I'm doing, they don't have the information you have, and they can have their own thoughts. Like everybody's got an opinion about everything, and like, so what?
That my dog's not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. That's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. And it's true because I'm like they're just reacting from a really over the top nervous system in the moment,
They're,
which I can relate to. I'm like, who can't?
yeah, they're doing the best that they can too with what they've got, like we all are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions. Just want to see how we're doing on time. Are you good with time still?
Yeah, I'm good until yeah, I have a hard stop at 2,
Okay.
but that gives us time until then. Yeah.
Okay. perfect. Just looked at the time. My thing was covering it. Okay. So the next question, you kind of talked about it with your own dog, and I can speak on it as well from my perspective, but I'd like to hear your perspective on is using medication as a crutch to deal with anxiety bad? And I think I've heard this. I used to work in the mental health space, for people who don't know that. I've heard that in the human space, and I hear it in the dog space. And then I hear some humans who are on medication and really don't want their dog to be on it.
Mhm.
And I've also heard some humans who are on it and really feel like it's helped them, so they want their dog to be on it. So having all of that in mind, what are your thoughts on it, any part of that?
I like to look at medication. It's a tool. It is not going to be the whole picture. It is not going to be a fix it pill, either with kids or adults or with dogs. I never look at medication as the sole answer, but it's something that can help you get there. And if you look at, treatment outcomes for humans, above and beyond, medication plus therapy combined is most effective at treating kind of more moderate or severe mental health concerns. Never medication alone, right? Or very rarely medication alone, and also rarely therapy alone, again, for these more moderate to severe mental health concerns. Someone gave me this beautiful analogy that medication can help, again, I'll start with humans and then transition to animals, or to at least my experience with my dog. um, can kind of turn the volume down on the intensity of what you're feeling enough so that therapy can actually really work. Medication can actually do access the therapy that you're doing, and make that much more successful. So I like to look at it as a tool. It's not the whole picture. It's not the only tool in the toolbox, but it's certainly one that can be really helpful for our dog. So I'm a therapist, and my husband's actually a psychiatrist. We're both very pro medication. We had no qualms putting him on Prozac. We tried a couple different things with him, obviously prescribed by the vet and under the vet supervision, medical supervision. Um, it's something that made his quality of life, I would argue, like, improve dramatically, really, just what I saw. Not just with his reactivity, my dog's reactivity to other people and dogs, but also with his own anxiety. He was having some, like, I don't know if you've ever seen this, Ashley, like restless, kind of like pacing back and forth in the house. And I think that was really like anxiety driven for him when he was first acclimating to our house when he first moved in. So it just really, I think, reduced some of his suffering. So I don't feel like it's bad. I'm more biased where I'm very pro using medication as a tool. Medication can also be temporary. It doesn't mean that you're on it forever. And our dog wasn't on Prozac forever. We actually transitioned now. He's on CBD just for pain management because he has some issues with his hips. Um, but it's a tool. Like, we wouldn't say that using toothpaste with fluoride is bad. Like, that helps protect the health of your teeth. We wouldn't say, or a lot of people wouldn't say using antibiotics is bad, maybe within reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tool to help people feel better, to help dogs feel better. Yeah. What do you think, Ashley? How does that work in line with your training techniques
Yeah,
or not?
yeah, no, I agree. I think, like you said, medication alone seldom changes anything, but I think, or maybe it would for the first couple of days or first couple of weeks. And then I often find alone, it's like not really enough, or they kind of develop a tolerance. At least dogs will develop a tolerance to it usually. But what I found is medication plus training is like amazing, because it, like exactly what you said for people, same thing for dogs. So I was like loving what you're saying, but it helps decrease the intensity of their big feelings, whatever that is for that dog. And so it can help them learn also, or be in a position to learn in more environments depending on the dog. So there's some cases where the second we leave the house, a dog is not in a position to learn and think. Like, they're so activated, their fight or flight turns on, or they don't want to eat. And you feel like you're not even there, and you talk to them and they're just completely tuning you out because they're so hyper vigilant. So those types of dogs, I'm doing the protocols of enrichment, and I can talk more about that if needed. I'm doing like things to meet their needs. We're decreasing stress levels. We're teaching them skills in an environment where they are successful. We can do the pattern games, but sometimes with some more moderate to severe issues, you still feel blocked. You're like, there's something here that's just really stunting this dog's ability to progress and their quality of life. And sometimes, depending on owner resources, we can dive in and figure out, is it like Is there underlying pain? How are they like, are they nutrient deficient? Whatever all these things are. But sometimes owners don't have that financial resource or the time or maybe the belief about that. So then I'm like, okay, if that's cut off, what else can we do? And medication absolutely is, I feel like, tremendously helpful for a lot of the dogs I work with on helping them be able to learn and think and do training in new environments. And I've even had some cases where dogs have like ADHD symptoms where it's like, and they're now starting to call that in the space, like actual like canine ADHD. And some medications have significantly helped those dogs also be able to like just be in their environment and not be so like overstimulated and frantic and mouthing all over the place. So it's, yeah, I found it to be incredibly helpful. And like you said, doesn't have to be forever. They can taper down off of it. And there are some cases where maybe some medications don't react perfectly with every dog. So it's having that conversation with their doctor, or if your vet isn't versed in this, you might want to go see a veterinary behaviorist who has kind of that ability. It's kind of like the equivalent of a psychiatrist officially, but in the canine world. Can be helpful. So yeah, to answer your question, I would say it's very similar.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, I haven't heard of that veterinary behaviorist, but that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. There's not that many, so I feel like there's a huge wait list and the costs are high. So that's where that financial piece, I'm like, we can do what we can with training and enrichment, and sometimes that's massive,
Yeah.
and sometimes you're stunted, and it's a puzzle, and every case is different. Also, though, I'm excited for this next question. What makes anxiety grow? I can talk about the dog piece, but maybe if you want to talk about it for humans, I loved all the notes you mentioned in there, so I'm excited to hear you dive in.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a genetic component with anxiety. So if someone in your biological family struggled with anxiety, it's more likely that you might struggle with anxiety at some point. Let me add this disclaimer. All of us have anxiety at some point, and anxiety is actually really protective to a certain degree. I always make the joke, but I think it's actually pretty accurate. If humans didn't experience any anxiety, I think our average lifespan would be like 2 years. Like we would be like getting into all sorts of trouble. We're end up kind of killing off the species. Anxiety keeps us safe to an extent. So we don't want, like, our goal is never like get rid of anxiety completely. It's actually protective, adaptive. We need some of it to keep us going, to keep us alive, to keep us able to plan for the future. When it reaches the point where it makes it harder for us to get our day-to-day done, that's when you know that you might have a problem and maybe might want to get some professional help. But so genetics can play a role. Any kind of stressors that are happening in your day-to-day, maybe it's in a relationship, maybe a relationship with your significant other, a relationship with someone in your family, or a relationship with your dog. That can definitely be a huge trigger for anxiety. Certain substances can make anxiety worse. Caffeine, believe it or not, is really intricately linked with anxiety. So much so at one of the clinics I used to work at, our psychiatrist there would get quantitative data on every single patient's daily caffeine intake, especially if they struggled with anxiety. So it's always something to have in the front of your mind. If you're anxious, watch your caffeine intake. But nicotine and even marijuana, as much as there are these legal medical marijuana dispensaries, I'm all for the legalization of marijuana politically and recreational use of it. Oh my gosh, I'm not opposed to whatsoever. One thing I do I find a little concerning is this narrative that marijuana is helpful for anxiety, where it might help your anxiety in the short term. There's actually a lot of longitudinal long-term studies that show ongoing marijuana use really worsens anxiety significantly and can actually create an anxiety disorder in someone that never had a clinical level of anxiety beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's something to be aware of if you're struggling with anxiety yourself, to look at kind of substance use and how that might be impacting it. And then I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but let me circle back to it again. Avoidance. The more we avoid something that's scary to us, the more likely we are to feel anxious around that specific thing. A great example for me personally, other than my dog, my gosh, have always struggled with my own anxiety on planes. I know logically, I know all the researched the statistics. I've looked into it, like logically, rationally, you're more likely, statistically more likely to be killed in a car crash than a plane crash. I know all that evidence, and even still, every time I step on a plane, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I like cannot fight that feeling. Um, the more I avoid planes, that would make that anxiety around planes so much dramatic, like catastrophically worse. The best thing I can do, which I have done, is push myself to go on planes, every year, a couple times a year, so that I get that exposure. And while it is still a little bit, I'm not super comfortable, I don't love it, I'm able to do it. I'm able to get on a plane and fly. So avoidance can definitely make anxiety grow, avoiding the thing that is hard for you or scary for you, whether that's planes or walking your dog on the street or speaking in public, or maybe for a lot of people I work with, even like going to the grocery store and checking out at the grocery store, because you have to interact with the cashier live. That can be really anxiety provoking.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's true. I feel like I see that in some dogs too. Of like, let's say they've learned like, oh, I'm really scared to like go behind a baby gate or something because they've had a history being locked behind there and not able to escape, and they perceived that as traumatic. Then if like you can tell if you walk towards that direction or touch a gate, they're like booking it. And I think I almost feel like this is anecdotally speaking. I feel like if I just did that and they run off and I never worked with them to help them feel better, it like gets worse and worse every time they're reacting to the scary thing, even if these reactions aren't barking and lunging, but avoidance. I find, and I don't like to, I will never force the dog to be like, you face your fears. It's this like gradual, voluntary, like, we're going to start where you're comfortable, and then we're gradually going to go a little bit harder, a little bit easier, a little bit harder, a little bit easier, and like kind of getting some reps in like that. So yeah, just when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, I see that in dogs too. And while obviously when we're going back to like what makes anxiety grow in dogs, I think most dogs aren't having like, nicotine, caffeine, or marijuana, but the owners, if they are doing that, their ability to stay regulated is going to impact how they're training their dogs. So I think that is an important piece in the training space that no one really ever talks about. And I found that to be true even in my own life of like, when I was having my kind of just baseline anxiety levels felt like a 7 at all times at one point. This was a couple, like probably 3 or 4 years ago. And I was like, wow, I've never been an anxious person or classified myself as that. And it was getting to a point where I would leave my house and feel like someone was going to chase me or like just panicked. I'm like, this is so strange. And I worked with someone who helped me kind of figure out some breath work techniques and just kind of working on that anxiety piece. And it really shifted my perspective on caffeine, especially of how much that was making my heart rate elevate, which then made me feel a body anxiety and then created this baseline. And I was also self-soothing with marijuana for pain, for endometriosis, where the two were like not working, and I got to a point where I couldn't sleep without it. And then I was going out on the weekends, like I was just feeling awful. And so like in hindsight, when I changed all of that and was like just completely like sober of any type of substance, even caffeine, and eating better, like all of these things started to help. I could sleep better. Then my baseline stress went down and down and down while I was increasing my capacity for it. So I feel like that's so important. I don't know, in the training or in the even just handling, dogs with behavior issues space. It's like those
Yeah,
things help us, our capacity for this stressful dog, a lot.
totally, totally. So that might even be like if you are anticipating a stressful training session, dog training session with your trainer coming up, maybe not having your cup of coffee until after, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like forego postponing it. If you are already feeling a little heightened, a little dysregulated, like let's just skip that coffee in the morning, save it for after.
Yeah, I still do that technique of if I feel like, oh, work's stressing me out and all these things, and then I'll have a little bit of caffeine and I feel the effects. I'm like, ooh, I should maybe take a few days off or do green tea or something instead. And then on the days where I feel my baseline is normal, I can have coffee and I feel fine. I'm like, we're good. But having that awareness is huge. And I think if you're using so many substances, it numbs your awareness to what that is. And then on the dog side, just to circle back around to answer that question on what makes anxiety grow for dogs, hugely it's also genetics, like we were saying, of what their even their breed type, but their parents and how they were their birthing process, like we chatted about. It's also learned factors. So if they learned something really scary happens under certain contexts, they're going to be like way more anxious about that experience, right? And sometimes that's their perception of it. So we might think, oh, we just walked our dog and out of nowhere they developed this anxiety. But maybe what happened was you were walking your dog, a big trash truck drove by, freaked your dog out. They have no idea what it is. And now they're associating walking in that area with this big, scary monster truck. And we think it's out of nowhere, but it's about their perception of it. And then also, I feel like what makes anxiety grow in dogs. Yeah, I think really mostly the genetics, the learned experiences, and probably avoidance, like you were saying too. Or if they're being fed really inflammatory foods, like if their diet is not great, it can greatly impact, I think, their anxiety and their stress tolerance. And a lot of the dog food on the market is questionable. So I think that is a hot topic that I'm actually going to be diving into a little bit more down the line. But it contributes because it's impacting their gut, and we know kind of how the gut impacts how we feel a little bit too. And then if their needs aren't met, so I feel like people, when you're adults, at least we can meet our own needs relatively. Children cannot. And so I think that children and teens, and you could speak on that too, like feel more maybe anxiety or frustrations or dysregulation because they can't meet their own needs. They can't just say, oh, I want to go do this because I need that, or they don't have the tools to do it. Dogs are also stuck. They're stuck in the environment that someone picked and put them in, and they don't get to choose if they can sniff. They don't get to choose who they can meet. They don't get to choose, like, I want to go out with my friends right now. Like, they're totally at the mercy of what people do for them. So that causes a lot of behavior issues. Baseline is figuring out the needs, and it's not obvious, and it's not all the owner's fault. It's I don't think we're just born knowing how to meet our dog's needs. We have to learn the species and how we can do that. And that's one of the first things I work with people on, because if we can't meet the dog's needs, the behaviors are always going to be present. And then you're kind of training and putting a band-aid on a waterfall. It's like it's something else is going to poke out somewhere else. So yeah, that I think that kind of circles back to what makes anxiety grow in dogs. I think a lot of the same things, and then a couple little additions, I would say.
I love how you brought up that what the dog may perceive as stressful totally goes right over our head, like the big trash truck, right?
Mm-hmm.
The dog that as could perceive that as a traumatic event, whereas for us, like, oh, whatever, it's a trash truck that came by.
Yeah.
I have actually a perfect example of that. Our dog Max used to, whenever he would hear, like, we'd go for our walk, and I guess the neighborhood we used to live in, a lot of motorcycles. Whenever a motorcycle would drive by, he would start barking and growling. And it took me a minute to put it together. It wasn't the sight of the motorcycle that he would bark at, but the sound it makes actually sounds like a dog growling. The
Mm-hmm.
like it, and that triggered because he would do it even if he didn't see it. So such a great reminder that we have to try to get on their level to understand that things that seem like normal to us because we grew up in this world, in this neighborhood, right, in this like modern society that we live in, think like a motorcycle, a trash truck, a moving van, whatever, seems normal to us. Even like an open house, if a house is being sold, people coming in and out of the house,
Mm-hmm.
that's not threatening or scary for us. But for a dog that hasn't been around it, that could be terrifying.
Yeah, and I feel like a perspective that helped me too is their senses are so different. So like how we see the world, like we're mostly visual, and every dog, even every dog breed, and then every individual, their perceptions and senses are so different. Like I think we can only guess what it feels like, but like they're not seeing the same things. Like shadows can be different, smells that we have no access to are stronger, and they can smell, like we said, stress from other animals there too. So even if a dog that was stressed out at the vet, those like scents are still there. So they come in and they're smelling all these stressed out dogs, and they're like, this space just feel, and the floors are slippery, and then maybe they have hip dysplasia, right? And the floor slips and it hurts. So we're like, this is kind of how that perception of trauma or of an anxious moment in dogs kind of develops, is it can go right over our heads. And two dogs, I see this all the time, of like either their body language is telling me they're really terrified or if we're confused, and people just are like, what are you doing, come on, and like drag their dog along. I'm like, oh, this dog is suffering, and people don't know because they don't read body language. And, or you see like the slippery floor, and I see this all the time of dogs avoiding following cues or commands because the floor is slippery and their paws slide out and it causes discomfort. And so people will be like, sit, sit, and they're like yelling or yanking on their dog if that's what they were taught to do to get the dog to comply. But I'm like, you're missing the story from the dog's perspective of, oh, ouch, that hurts. I don't want to do that. But if you ask them on the carpet, 9 out of 10 times they usually do it. So it's just that perception piece of they have a different experience, they have different bodies, different senses. I think can really help with empathy and also understanding like our dogs behavior is, it's not necessarily because of us. It's like they have their whole experience that we have no idea what's going on, but we can make guesses through reading their body language.
Yeah, it'd be like asking someone to like walk out on an ice skating rink, right? Come walk with me. Hell no,
Yeah.
walk out there. It's cold. I'm in sneakers. I'm gonna fall on my
Yeah.
ass. No.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like it's such a thing. And I don't think anyone really thinks of it. It's not a common, you're just like, oh come on, because they'll see like dogs running on their own and they'll be like, oh no, it can't cause pain because the dogs are running there. But similar to like with kids are like this, if you get like the kid zoomies, they're just like running around, they can hurt themselves, but they're so excited, they're not like feeling the pain. Maybe it's from adrenaline, who knows, but they're not like accessing that. Or I almost attribute it to if you really wanted to go to a party and you're kind of feeling a little bit of discomfort or pain, you kind of like suck it up for the really fun thing. But if it was something you didn't want to do, like taking a math test, you might be really like, oh, I really don't feel good. Like so it's subjective to that experience too. Okay, cool. So I think we have one more question. So what do I do if my dog's behavior is preventing me from being able to meet my own needs? So a common example, or two that I come across is if people own a dog with separation anxiety, they can't leave their house because the dog's going to howl, bark, tear things up, hurt themselves, or if they can't travel because a dog is aggressive with strangers. So if the human is like, hey, my need is I need to go see my friends, or I need to go to the gym, or I need to go to get food, it's like, how can we help people feel better in that space when their dogs are like, you know what I'm saying? Like their dogs are impacting their ability to regulate. I see it all the time. Do you have any suggestions on that? And I can also speak on things too if it's kind of a stuck moment.
Say this to parents all the time, and it's so equally applicable to pet parents. Your ability to care for your child or dog is directly related to your ability to care for yourself.
Mhm.
So, whatever your own human needs are, getting food, having your own social life outside of your dog, going to the gym, your ability to get those needs met is going to directly improve your ability to care for your dog. Because if your mental health is in a rough space, you're not going to have the patience that's required to deal with a pet that all pets require, right? Any relationship requires patience, frustration tolerance, compassion, empathy, whether it's with an animal or with your child or your husband or wife or a friend or your family member, your mom, whoever. All relationships take energy, and so you need to be able to take care of yourself. My only thing I could say is if that happens is get help, get professional help, find a trainer, individual trainer, someone like Ashley who really knows what she's doing and is really passionate about this. Get resources, get professional support so that you know how to meet your dog's needs the best way possible, how you can safely leave the house to take care of yourself so that you can talk.
Yeah, and I think that's huge, and that's one of the first things I try and help people with is my first goal is getting the human to be able to meet their own needs first, because like you said, they're not able to do that if they're not feeling regulated or calm or whatever. It's like the only responses or tools you have in those moments are going to usually be more violent communication strategies that are oops, and then you feel guilt about it. So I'm like, let's avoid that by meeting our own needs and mapping that out, and then thinking of I can help with like creative solutions to meet both of the dog and the human's needs at the same time. Where sometimes if it's like separation anxiety, maybe we can find out like could the dog go to doggy daycare? Could we have a friend come over and watch the dog? What does that look like? Or can we get it good enough? Maybe the dog's a little bit anxious, but it's not turning into a full-blown panic attack. It's working with the individual dog and owner. And for aggression, working with a professional, I think, should be mandatory for that because it's just the risk of error is too high. But then if you can get to the point where, wow, you can travel, or can your dog make one friend? And if your dog can make one friend, then you can usually replicate that and try with another and have like a team of 2 to 3 dog sitters on deck that are your dog's friends if they're stranger aggressive. It's like if we can get just one and then replicate it so you have a team behind you so you can travel, you can see your parents. Like, and then if you end up dating someone, you can replicate this idea to have your dog meet that person. And but that's something that's not obvious. So again, like you're saying, working with a professional, and then if it's feeling overwhelming too, I'm like, I always recommend too, like therapy and having people consider that too, because it can feel like a lot to carry on your own.
My husband and I joke, this is just a little aside. We're like, neither one of us could ever have an affair because Max wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, you're like,
He would
that is so funny.
never
Like
even,
we would know instantly.
there'd be like a dead body on the floor. Not the
You
dog
like,
would
no,
never.
that's funny. Well, I had a dog growing up too that was, she was fearful, but would just bark at anyone. So I'm like, I could never sneak out as a teen or anything. So it's like, she would always just like blow up my spot if the door opened, she was barking. So I was like, well, it was a really good alarm system for my parents.
So funny. Yes. Did like bonus of the, yeah, adult reactivity.
Yeah, they should be like, hey, get a reactive dog if you have teenagers, because then you'll know if they're sneaking in or out.
So funny. Oh my gosh. Did you want to do a couple minutes of maybe Q&A at the end if anyone has questions, or was there anything
Yeah,
to cover?
yeah, let's do that. If anyone has any questions they want to type in the chat, I can figure out how to do this. This is my first time doing live.
I
So,
think I've seen a couple comments, or yeah, one or two comments in here.
I can see the question box. Do you just maybe click the comment box? Nope.
Oh yeah, I guess I don't see the questions box. Maybe that's something you can see that I can't.
I can see that like people hearted thing. I can see some comments actually, yeah. Well, if anyone has a question and they want to type it in, now is the time. And then we can give some people some time to write that in. Or if you have any questions and vice versa, we can start with that too.
Yeah, you said your next that you were moving towards is about dog nutrition.
Yes, so I'm actually going to be partnering with a veterinarian who specializes in nutrition. So she's going to kind of talk or touch base more on the specifics of it, but it's cool to get that perspective because I think there's a lot of backlash at vets for like pushing certain foods, but then if there's a formal science and formal training in it, that it's really important for the vets that want to specialize in that nutrition piece. So she's a really, I think, great perspective on that. And it's not my specialty. I know how much food can heal like humans because I've had my own experience with it healing and helping my endometriosis. And if I eat poorly, it's like hell for me. So it's something I was passionate about, wondering like if I notice these dogs are having anxiety, skin issues, gut issues, that's telling me like there's something internal that's inflamed. And when we feel inflamed, our frustration tolerance goes down, our stress tolerance goes down. We're more irritable. And I've worked with some cases where we found out a dog had like a B12 deficiency and was causing an extreme resource guarding. And then when the B12 deficiency was like supplemented, I forget exactly how they went through that. It was a shared case I had with a mentor like years ago. But once they solved that, the aggression just completely went away. So it was like completely from that. So that's where I'm always curious. And my perspective is never like, is this all a training issue? It's all a learning issue. I'm more like, can there be things under the hood? And I would argue most of the time, yes. And so this veterinarian I'm working with, and we've shared a couple clients together, really like helps that piece. And I've seen it help some dogs that have baseline really, really high levels of anxiety that even meds aren't helping, or maybe help a little bit. Or it just feels, I don't know, peculiar where I'm like, I think there's just a lot of inflammation. And so she kind of helps. Her whole thing, I think, is more on fresh diets, but also if you can't afford that, working with, even just like the kibble type diets that are healthier.
So interesting. Yes. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. How you feel your body is going to impact the way that you feel. And the same is, of course, true for humans. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting too in our society right now. It's like a lot of the foods we're feeding dogs are just highly processed because that's what we've been feeding our humans in our diet, at least in the US. And then there's no regulation in dog food. So they can put anything in there. They can label it with the best marketing. There's no one's coming in to double check it. There's no like doggy FDA kind of a thing. So yeah, so there's some foods that have been poisoning some dogs, or it's causing cancer, all these things, or just inflammation. So have making sure that we're getting food that like a certified veterinarian or veterinary nutritionist like formulated the proportions of the nutrients that are in them is important. And I think this is just my guess, but I've heard of a lot of dogs refusing food, and I'm like, I'm wondering if something in the food is causing inflammation, or they don't like it because maybe their specific body needs different nutrients. And everyone in the training space historically has always just said, oh no, they're just learning to like turn their nose up about it because they can get something better.
Mm.
But I find, maybe that's true, but maybe the better thing is because it's real food and it's not this, I don't know, overly processed thing. So I just like to stay curious about it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
What's because I'm gonna have to sign off. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to follow up or had any other questions? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so they can either DM me on Instagram, they can message me or email me on my website. And if they want your contact info, I can also share that or have them reach out to your Instagram directly as well. And I have a link in my bio if they wanted to schedule a free discovery call. And then for you, do they have like, what's the quickest way if someone was like, oh my God, I really want to work with her as my therapist?
Yeah, check out my website, www.lajoyatherapycenter.com. You can also DM me on Instagram at mytherapistkelly. And through my website, there's a form you can submit and we can get a phone call, consult call scheduled so we can get to know each other a little bit better.
Amazing. All right, well, I know you have to hop off. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
We'll be in touch. Thank you so much for hosting this live. I had a great time.
Me too. All right, bye.
Bye.